I'd like to welcome Kinlay Francis to the first episode of In Conversation With. Kinlay Francis, also known as the Viking, owns Orkney Uncovered, which specialises in offering clients a bespoke private touring adventure in the historic and beautiful Orkney Islands. He lives in the capital Kirkwall with his wife Kirsty, his young son Benjamin, and his yellow lab Holly. I'll put links to Kinlay's website and social media in the description below, so you can go and find out more about what he does and watch some awesome videos about the sites in Orkney. Welcome, Kinlay. First of all, I'm always fascinated by career journeys. What made you decide to become a tour guide?
Thank you very much, Laura. I appreciate you welcoming me on your show and your broadcast. I worked in financial services for many years, and I got fed up being stuck in an office. And money was fine, but money's not everything. So I left financial services in 2008, and I decided to come back to my home place, Orkney, and set up a private tour company, doing initially military history tours, and then branched out into doing much further archaeology and adventure tours as well.
Oh, awesome. So you're following your dreams, really.
I am, yes, that's right. And it's great. I mean, I get to spend my entire life, if I wish, outdoors, and do sea swimming and mountain biking and taking the dog for a walk and so on. This is great.
Awesome. Now, I'm sure my audience are familiar with some of the more famous Neolithic sites in Orkney, but there are also a few lesser well-known ones. Can you give us a little overview of everything there is that's Neolithic on the islands?
Yeah, there's so many sites that are Neolithic on the Orkney Islands that it's difficult to put down into, even a conversation. But if you look at Orkney mainland, you have the standing stones of Stenness, the ring of Brodgar, Skara Brae, Unscripted Tomb, Cuween Cairn, Whiteford Cairn. There's many more. And that's just on one island. There's 70 islands that make up the Orkney Islands archipelago. Maeshowe Chambered Tomb is a big Neolithic tomb as well. So lots of tombs. And it's not just from the Neolithic period, it's all the way up to the Iron Age and past that as well. But yes, lots of different places.
I hadn't realised there are 70 islands, actually. I just thought it was like a few, 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's right. We're quite lucky that we have 70 islands. 21 of them are inhabited. We have about a population of about 22,000 people. But yeah, the biggest island is called mainland. It's this island that we're on just now. And you're looking at most of the Neolithic sites in Neolithic Orkney are based on one island. This is island one.
Oh, okay, great. And what little known facts do you have about these Orcadian monuments?
Well, for example, Standing Stones of Stenness is a great one to visit. It's a henge monument. It's believed to predate Stonehenge by about 1,300 years. And the stones are amazing. They are made of sandstone, and they are about 20 feet, so 5 meters above the ground, and about 3 meters, roughly 10 feet below the ground. And there would have been approximately 8 of them in a circle that's about 110 feet in diameter. And the idea behind it is the henge is used for transferring your voice. So when we have a westerly direction wind, when you speak quietly, your voice echoes back from the ditch, which is the henge. So the stones act as a barrier, so it echoes your voice. So it's quite an amazing type of thing. And with things like Maeshowe Chambered Tomb as well, it was built by Neolithic man over 5,000 years ago. What they managed to do, which always amazes me, is that on winter solstice, December the 21st or thereabouts, when the sun sets, it heads between the two large hills of the island of Hoy, right over the top of one singular standing stone called the Barnhouse Stone. And then it's supposed to light up the back chamber of Maeshowe Chambered Tomb at the lowest point at sunset. But because the Earth's axis has tilted in the last 5,000 years, it just misses it to the left. But it still has this amazing glow of orange on the back chamber. So they developed this and built this over 5,000 years ago, and it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
What did they find, any burials when they excavated Maeshowe?
Maeshowe was excavated in the 1800s. They only found a bit of a skull fragment, but it was believed to have been raided by the Vikings and the Norse many, many times, probably before that. So the only bit of skull fragment that was found by a local man who got his bag. He lost basically his satchel in a train, including whatever he found in Maeshowe. So that wasn't great. So, but no, there's been other things discovered in one of the biggest Neolithic sites. It's called Ness of Brodgar, and it's between where the Ring of Brodgar is, which dates back to 4,500 years ago, and where the Standing Stones of Stenness is. And it's believed to be a gigantic cathedral-type worshipping place, perhaps a trading base from as far back as the Mesolithic period up to the Iron Age, but the majority of it's in the Neolithic period. And different parts of skeletal remains and things have been found there as well.
Yeah, I read something about one of the buildings at Ness of Brodgar being more obviously a temple-type structure than the other dwellings. It got me thinking, like, you've got this rather sophisticated ritual culture, well, very rich culture, let's say, dating all the way back more than 5,000 years. And it's hard to think like what their daily life was like, because you think, okay, it's a fairly harsh environment, so survival must have been a big part of everyday life. But then at the same time, they are having all this investment in ritual, building these incredible stone circles. And I mean, they are really quite tall there. And when you were saying the other day as well about how they're partly buried in the ground, because here not very many of the megaliths are actually buried, they rest on the rock surface. And I just think that means that those monoliths, those menhirs, are even longer than they look.
Yeah.
And that's quite some kind of effort they went to quarry them. Do you know where they were quarried from? Has any research been done into that?
Yeah, I mean, radiocarbon dating has been taken on some of the different stone circles here in the Orkney Islands, and believed to have come from places like the Esneby coastline. So here in Orkney, if you go back, say, 400 million years, it takes you to what is believed to have been a gigantic freshwater lake called Lake Orkney, joining up to Doggerland towards Scandinavia. This large area of fresh water would have been at some stage gigantic, and what we're left with underneath is all the rocks, rather stones and bedrock around the Orkney Islands. You can see fossils on from as far back as 400 million years from the old Lake Orkney lake bed. So it's believed to many of these stones being to hand cut, because sandstone splits on a straight edge, so it's quite useful, but it's still quite heavy to move them. So from a radius of about 10 miles, nowhere near as long as the 53 miles from Stonehenge or thereabouts, but it's still a distance, and not be able to use any logs for rolling, because Orkney, one thing we don't have many of are trees, and that's purely because of the weather. So the likelihood is probably use lots of strands of kelp and carved rounded stones, and then over time pull them into position. But you're right in saying that Neolithic man, they probably only lived to about the age of about 40, and it would have probably taken at least 2 generations, maybe 3, particularly to build the Standing Stones of Stenness. So a long time and a long effort for generations to come.
Wow! So it's like must have been a multi-generational effort, which means it held a lot of importance to them.
Yeah, that's
wow.
Right. Yeah, no, it's an amazing place.
Say again, sorry.
I say it's quite an amazing place. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, what sort of tourists do you get coming all the way up there? I'm curious about this because, I mean, I've been to Scotland many times and I have a very specific interest in the Neolithic. But what about people that, you know, your general tourists coming to Scotland, who makes their way all the way up there and comes to look at these particular stone circles?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, my clients tend to be from the United States, Canada, and Russia, so it tends to be a difference of a variety of people I deal with. Mostly deal with North America, but you tend to find that mostly people from the United States, particularly from Canada as well, all the way down to South America. We get some people from South Africa and Russia. And then you've got cruise ships that come in with the Italians, Germans, basically Europeans on board, so to speak. And just a good mix of everybody, but I would say primarily it's from North America. Yeah.
All right. And do you have any funny stories from these tours?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of funny things that people have asked me, and not naming any countries here. But one of the funniest questions I got asked was in 2016. And after we had done the Stone Circle tour, this lady asked me, she said to me, when are we walking around the Circle of Stones? And I said, we've just walked around the Ring of Brodgar. It's 350 feet in diameter, it's a circle. And she said to me, well, I can't see it's a circle. I'm quite disappointed. And I said, well, it's not like it's 5 feet across. It's 350 feet in diameter. So I had to bring up a picture from Google and show her that it was a circle from the sky so she could believe me. I've also had funny things like how did modern man discover the standing stones of Stenness? Well, I answered, you open your eyes. They're there right in front of you. They're 20 feet above the ground. They've been there all the time. My favourite one is from Skara Brae. Basically, this chap asked me, why was Skara Brae built so far from the road? So that's a good question. So, and how do you power the stone sites with electricity? And my personal favourite is not really, I suppose, related to ancient history, but was a chap from the UK asked me, how do you survive the winter months in the Orkney Islands? Do you have to slaughter your own animals? And I said, no, we go to Tesco. So that was it. But I get a lot of funny questions, definitely.
Oh, that's brilliant. I'm still upset that guy lost that skull on the train. Like, I'm just.
I know.
I have never heard that before, and now that you mentioned that, I'm just thinking that is so inconvenient.
It is very inconvenient, yes. And
the one fragment there was, and he took it and lost it.
He had one job to do, and he lost his bag. So, yeah, it's not a good part of our history anyway, that's for sure.
I mean, because I'm always fascinated by cairns, passage tombs, dolmens as well, because of the fact that often there are no burials there. And that's probably because they've been looted in the past. But sometimes, there's also like the idea that they could have had multiple purposes over the years, or they may have had another kind of role to play in society that we're not able to understand now. So this always fascinates me, is like finding out, okay, when the excavations happened of the tomb, what was in it?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I always find that quite funny.
Yeah, there are a couple of tombs actually here in the Orkney Islands that were discovered and opened up at the turn of the century and the late 19th century, and they discovered a variety of different things in them. One of them was discovered in the 1920s, and it was called Midhowe Chambered Cairn. And Midhowe is on the island of Rousey. The actual chambered tomb is known as the Great Ship of the Dead. So it's about 80 feet long and has several chambers. And it was discovered with up to 29 human and animal remains in it when it was discovered in the excavated roughly in the 1930s. And then before that, also in the late 19th century, Cuween Cairn in a place called Finston was finally excavated at the turn of the 20th century. And inside were found up to 60 animal remains, mostly from dogs. And so the chambers inside Cuween Cairn are very small. It's almost impossible for a human being to get into them. So it looks like it's been built primarily for the burial of animals, with one middle chamber possibly for human skeletal remain burial as well.
Oh, wow. All dogs? That's
mostly dogs, yeah.
Assembly.
That's right. It's a bit like Anubis for the Egyptians, same sort of idea perhaps. Maybe the dogs were revered as a sort of a precious animal, or maybe they worshipped something along that lines.
Is that a Neolithic tomb?
It is a Neolithic tomb, yes, that's correct. And it's
interesting.
Yeah, it's like a very small version of Maeshowe Chambered Tomb, but it's mostly bedrock cut, and then it's got cobbled walls around it.
Because I think many megalithic monuments, even the temples here, they find a lot of animal bones, but it tends to be cattle or sheep or pigs. The idea being that there was kind of like ritual feasting took place, probably some kind of animal sacrifice. Here it was in temples of the living, but in other places it can be for funerary rituals. But tends to be that the majority of these faunal assemblages are made up of cattle or ovicaprids. And so I find it really interesting that this was dogs. I don't think I've heard much of that before, apart from, as you say, in later cultures, like in ancient Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is an incredible place, and should you come up to the Orkney Islands, anybody watching this and yourself, the Cuween Cairn, you really got to crawl into it. It's a passageway is about 9 feet long, and then when you get into it, I can stand up. I'm 6'7", so I'm a big lad. But perhaps there's something called defleshing that happened, where people were left outside of the village or the tomb, and the birds and the animals pick off the flesh of the bones, and then it's purely just bones then added in.
I mean, I actually read something once, this theory about Skara Brae having a link with ancient Egypt. And I don't think there's any overwhelming evidence for it. I think it's one of these more like sensationalist ideas. Even I notice Skara Brae is contemporary with the Maltese temples, and obviously the oval enclosures and the dresser. They look very similar to the Maltese temples. Even the dresser looks a bit like the trilithon style altars that we have here. But there is no proven connection between the cultures at all, and it's a very anecdotal thing. It's just something that you notice, and often certain motifs, cultural motifs, architectural styles, they do develop independently in different cultures. But I'm just wondering, like, if you've heard anything about this link with ancient Egypt, or if tourists ask you about that when they come up there, because it's obviously it's a huge deal if it were true. So I bet that people love to talk about it.
There's a bit about that. I mean, I don't know a huge amount about the connection with ancient Egypt, other than Skara Brae is believed to predate Giza by 600 years. So the pyramids.
Oh, yes.
But what I have heard is that Professor Gordon Childe, the British antiquarian and archaeologist, his friend Howard Carter, I think it's Carter, was the man who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb and excavated it. So Carter got Giza and Tutankhamun's tomb, and his friend Childe got Skara Brae. So one found gold, one found stone. But other than the fact of perhaps a bit of possibly the same sort of perhaps building idea of using proper sections of blocks to build up the foundations of a building, and use corbelling walls, which is very similar to places in Egypt. I don't know much else than that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think it was just some sort of sensationalist thing, something to do with a similarity in pottery, and I'm not sure. There was just it was just a sensationalist thing. I just thought it was quite funny, and I just wondered, since you're there and people come up to see you all the time and ask about monuments, if anybody refers to these rather wild but very intriguing theories.
Something to bring up, Laura, is that you get a lot of, you can sometimes, when you're excavating places like Ness of Brodgar, you might find a bit of pottery, or pot as it's shortened to, so grooveware pottery. Now, what's interesting about this is that some of the companies up here, such as the Harry Potter, way before the actual Harry Potter the Wizard, came along, a chap called Andrew Appleby, who uses pottery and makes it based on what was discovered in these Neolithic sites. And some perhaps of the designs of these types of potteries are believed to come from as far away as Egypt as well. So it might have some similarity to the types of grooveware pottery that Neolithic people had, and then the Egyptians after that.
Interesting. Since Orkney is home to some of the oldest megalithic sites, and I mean, I think we can't emphasize that enough, that these are extremely old megalithic sites compared to some other areas in the British Isles. Where do you think these megalith builders came from, and why do you think they chose the Orkney Isles?
Well, that's a good question. Orkney is believed to have been continuously lived in for about 10,000 years. And when we talk about the Orkney Islands, we just shorten it to Orkney. It's believed that they probably came across from the Dogger Bank, and from Scandinavia, perhaps, to settle on what is now British mainland, and make their way up over the Pentland Firth, the strip of water between the North Sea and the North Atlantic. and then settle in Orkney. Or they've come across from mainland Britain as well, so perhaps from Scandinavia, which would be quite a long journey, and settle perhaps on Dogger Bank and then make their way to the UK. But a variety of different theories, but it's believed to be from perhaps Northern Europe anyway.
And when was Doggerland, the bank of Doggerland, the last bit, when was that inundated?
It's believed to be about 8,000 years ago, I think, during the Middle Stone Age. And that's because there was a mega tsunami. I think it was an ice shelf or something broke in Norway that sent a large wave or a series of waves very quickly towards the UK. What is the UK today? So I've taken geologists on tour, and they can apparently tell of a major cataclysmic natural event of about 8,000 years ago. So it's believed to be inundated about that time, as was possibly what we call the Pentland Firth today, the rising of the seas, but also this sort of trench that's very fast moving water. But it's believed to be approximately that sort of period of time, the Middle Stone Age.
And I actually read as well that there is some archaeological evidence from the Mesolithic in Orkney. So, yeah, so there you had the sort of in the transition phase from the hunter-gatherers to settled agriculture.
Exactly.
There were people inhabiting the islands that were leading that sort of life. So, yeah, I guess it makes sense that they had hopped across from the Dogger Bank. Yeah,
it would have been quite an arduous journey in the Neolithic period as well, getting across what is Europe's worst tidal race, the Pentland Firth. It's about, I think it's at high tide, it's about 23 knots, so it's very fast rate of tidal movement. And it's 9 miles long, it connects the North Atlantic to the North Sea. So they came over on vessels built big enough just to carry themselves and some animals over this very dangerous stretch of water. But before that, perhaps ancient man may have been able to walk across from the UK mainland to the Orkney Isles. Today, our most southerly point of the Orkney Islands to the most northerly part of the UK mainland is only 6.8 miles away, so we're quite close by.
I can swim it.
Well, yeah.
I can't swim it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go up against the orcas, to be honest, but yeah, that's fine.
Do you reckon that there's more sites still to be discovered over there?
Yeah, according to archaeologists up here in the Orkney Islands and further afield, there's a saying here in Orkney goes that if you scratch the surface, you're just scratching the Neolithic surface. So it's believed to be at least 90% of ancient sites still yet to be discovered. The main reason behind this is because of farms, and so if the governments find out that a farmer may have uncovered something of ancient, perhaps, interest, then they could potentially requisition their land, making it unusable for farming. So it's one of the reasons, one of the biggest industries here in the Orkney Islands, other than oil and gas, is farming. And of around about 8% of the people who live here in Orkney work in agriculture. So it's a very big market. And so sometimes you're driving along the road and you can see a big bump in a field with a sort of straight section appearing from it, and the rest of the field is flat, and you think that's got to be a tomb. So it's just waiting to be discovered. And I would say that back in the Neolithic period as well, it was a slightly warmer climate than it is today. So maybe 1 or 2 degrees, maybe a slightly bigger population. So, but there's things everywhere. And as the tide comes in and the coastal erosion is moving away, you can start finding bits of different ancient sites on the shoreline.
Oh, awesome. I mean, I love going around here looking for sites. I mean, my dream is to find something that hasn't been discovered before, and I haven't managed that yet. But up until now, what I've done a lot of, and this is why I called myself the megalith hunter, is I've looked into old papers and old maps and looked for sites that used to be mentioned that they might have, that definitely the archaeologists know are there, but they're not that easy to find. Yeah. And then I go and I look for them, and then even if it's just a block in a modern wall, an old megalithic block that's now built into a rubble wall, I take a picture of it, and it's just like, it's still amazing to me to stand there in that field and say, wow, once there was probably a temple structure here as well. So I really enjoy that. And then I put the GPS on my website so people can find it, because the last time it was referenced was so long ago that there was no GPS location. Mm-hmm. So I'm really fascinated by that, because I think it's really hard to build up a picture of the ancient past if you don't know all the sites that there were. So I see a lot of people try to make patterns out of sites in different regions, but it's really hard to make patterns when you don't have a full picture, because there's just so much that still hasn't been discovered or has been destroyed in the past. So I mean, I always just wonder if anyone else is like me, that just walks around and sees a block and gets really excited about it and thinks that could be.
It does happen, yeah. And actually, as we're talking about this, a couple of months ago, a farmer out towards, I think it was Sandwick on the Orkney mainland where I live, found part of an old wall that he was rebuilding, and he found a whole lot of Viking runic writing on the stone within the wall. So what's happened over for thousands of years, other than our main source of trade, which is water, particularly during the Hudson Bay Trading Company point of time between 17th century and late 19th century, where stone has been traded throughout thousands of years and taken. So many of these old sites have been raided by Bronze Age. Iron Age have raided Bronze Age. The Vikings, or rather the Picts, have raided Iron Age. Vikings have raided Picts, and so on. And you've got all these stones that sometimes you go to someone's house or an old farm, and you look at a lintel and you think, how has that got runic writing on it? It's because somebody who built it stole the stone from an ancient site before these sites became protected. So it's quite interesting what's being uncovered, and people ploughing up fields. A cornstone was discovered less than a quarter of a mile where I live. Somebody was going through a field and hit some sort of big block, and they dug it up and they found it was believed to be some sort of ancient, perhaps Neolithic stone for grinding barley. Yeah, so lots of amazing things you can find.
What do you think is, so out of the tourists that come to visit Orkney, your clients, what's the proportion that's interested in Neolithic? Do you find that more people are into the military history or the cathedrals or this sort of Neolithic period?
It's a good question. I mean, for me, it's a sort of, last year was mostly military history, and that's because most of the people came from my tours were from the UK for staycation because of what we've had to deal with COVID-19. But before that, you're looking at about a 50-50 percentage between military history and ancient history. But the type of military history I do is not just from the Second World War or the First World War. I go all the way back, as far back as we can go, regarding defence. And some of these ancient sites from the Neolithic period, archaeologists believe today that they may have been reinforced for defence purposes as well. So our sort of idea about Neolithic man being all sort of very much caring in the community and hunting and gathering and everything is not overly overly relevant anymore, shall we say. There's a variety of different sort of aspects and insights into perhaps what they had to deal with, and may have been raids from other villages, may have been something else. But many of these big buildings, such as Skara Brae, the newer part of the village in Skara Brae, has been underground, interlinked by a tunnel that goes in a zigzag formation. So the idea behind that's probably entirely to stop the weather, but it could be to stop people running in at low level. So we just don't know. But I would say that I for my tours and my clients, I give them sort of all sort of angles, not just what archaeologists say and believe to be, because none of the archaeologists agree with one another. Everybody's got a different story. So I try and use my expertise in military history, but also I'm not an expert in Neolithic by all means, but I've been doing this for several years now, so I know my stuff. So thank you.
Oh, I think it's important to talk to people from lots of different disciplines. As like an independent researcher, I obviously have that advantage in that I'm not like an expert in a specifically niche area, but I can also talk to people from lots of different disciplines and speculate, have a bit of fun with it. And sometimes you meet people like in the construction industry, and if you ask them their opinions on how the megalithic monuments were built, it's very different to how it's generally thought of. So I think it's good to talk to people and get their feedback on it. And people that did military history studies of the 1500s will probably have another completely different idea, because there's not much example of battle wounds on skeletons, and the temples don't appear to be fortified. It's thought that the Neolithic people were pretty peaceful, and then you get to the Bronze Age and all of a sudden the settlements are largely fortified, both here, same in Sardinia, for example. And so we're trying to look at the past, but then maybe that's because we're looking at fortifications from a different
Yeah, maybe. I mean, what's interesting as you bring it up, though, is it is purely down to perspective. And I've taken a lot of, generals and admirals and different people from around the world that have been in the military up to the Ring of Brodgar. And the Ring of Brodgar sits up on a high point of a hill that you can see panoramic all the way around you at 360 degrees. And you've got this section of hill in the middle, or believed to be possibly an aquifer in the middle, but with a whole row of stones around it. So many of the guys that take from the military up there look at it and say, oh, that's for defence, the big ditches to stop people getting into it. And then you take archaeologists up, or anybody else who wants to open the horizon, and say, oh, well, it could have been used as an area to transfer your voice. You've got a natural auditorium with the two, the hills in the distance and then the lochs in the middle, and then this point. So it's possibly an area where people came to mate. So there's a variety of different things. But what's interesting, though, is in the Second World War, in 1941, a army battalion called the 9th Battalion Gordon Highlanders were practiced anti-invasion training using the henge at the Ring of Brodgar. It's an Imperial War Museum picture. So they are using a henge built by Neolithic man to practice anti-invasion training in Bren gun carriers. So modern military using an ancient site, perhaps used for a variety of different reasons.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Maybe they're far removed in thousands of years, but the purpose was the same. You know.
Well, I honestly think it's used for worship, but there's a variety of different reasons.
Yeah.
It's always good when you take different clients, Russians as well, and variety of people. They have a variety of different ideas of what it is, and that's what I enjoy about meeting people throughout the world. Everybody's got maybe a slightly different opinion of what it may have been used for.
Well, I also think with stone circles, because they vary so much in size, in terms of like diameter, in terms of the number of stones, the height of the stones, whether there's a ditch or there isn't a ditch, it can be quite hard to interpret them because it doesn't seem to be a lot of consistency. And I always wonder, is that because they were for ceremony, but there were regional variations, or did they have to have a certain practical element as well?
Yeah.
Whether it be that they are in an area that needs to be have a defensive element, or they're in an area with super severe weather, so that changes how they build it, or because of astronomical alignments, because it was more of a calendar. If it was a calendar, was it practical or was it ceremonial? So many things like that. It's really hard because there's just so many different types.
Yeah.
This is what I always find quite confusing. Like I look at them all on Google Earth, and I look at them in lots of different regions, and I try to find patterns, and it's quite hard to find a pattern.
Yeah, there's some amazing things actually. Have you been to the island of Arran, just outside of Glasgow? It's on the west coast. The island of Arran has a heritage trail, and we tend to go there up until COVID anyway every year as a family, because I love geology, I love hill walking and hiking and ancient history. There's a heritage walk within there. There's I think it's about 3 square kilometers, and there's about 10 different stone circles within that area. Many of them are very small stones that perhaps used for children. But it's not just up here in the Orkney Islands and other parts, but we have here in Orkney, we have the 3rd largest henge in the UK, and that's the Ring of Brodgar. And it's built probably about 800 years after the Standing Stones of Stenness. So Standing Stones of Stenness is very close to the sea level. The Ring of Brodgar is much higher up on a higher point position. And it's at the same stage as that Skara Brae is building its 2nd building of village with underground tunnels linked to one another. So we're not quite sure what it was for, other than perhaps a major place to worship along with Ness of Brodgar, or perhaps something more sinister.
Yeah, and I guess as well, the geology was very different back then. So we always have to think about the geology of the landscape. But I also think with these stone circles, we tend to sort of group everything together. That's Neolithic, that's Bronze Age. But there's actually, we're talking thousands of years. So even, the temples here were in use for more than 1,000 years. And they changed so much during that time. They were remodeled a lot. And I always think, well, was its original purpose the same as the purpose that it had when it fell into, when it stopped being used? Because we just don't, think about now a generation and a couple of generations, how much life changes. Okay, a lot of that's driven by technology, but still things change a lot over 50 to 100 years. And there we are sort of just grouping everyone together and saying it's Neolithic. But there you say like the stone circles are 800 years apart, for example.
I mean, there is that. What's interesting as well, Laura, is bringing that subject up as well, is that on the Ring of Brodgar, some of the stones have runic writing on them. So, and so the Vikings have come along, and the Crusaders, First and Second Crusade after that, have been coming along and writing their names in either twig runic writing or younger or elder Futhark. And one of them, one of the runologists said that one of the stones has got something called Norn writing on it. It's from the Danes, from around about the 9th century. And it translates to if you enter our location, our fort will kill you. Okay, so the Vikings have taken it on as probably a place ancient man before them has built as a worship, but also use it as a focal point for lookout and perhaps defense. So over thousands of years, it's gone from possibly purely being, maybe worshipped to something else. And over the years, and Bronze Age men have come to enjoy it as well. And 3,000 years ago, they built barrows around it, burial mounds, and now these 4 earth mounds, almost like a quadrant over the size of the Ring of Brodgar. So, and you can see how ancient man has moved on from then. But it's quite interesting about what if we could go back in time to find out what on earth they're up to.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'd love to. I was just so curious. I spend a lot of time trying to like solve these things. I come up with like little theories here and there, and I start to like build it out, But it takes quite a lot of. You do a lot of reading and a lot of research. And I always try to start with academic papers and say, okay, what do the archaeologists think is weird about the site? Before you speculate, let's look for where the real mystery is, the proven mystery, and then I start to say, okay, let's speculate, let's have some fun with it. But even whenever I come up with an idea, then I'll read something else that kind of like means that is a rubbish idea, or it kind of brings up more questions than answers, and I just think back to the drawing board. But I love it, and this is just something that I really think that I will solve at least a little bit of the mystery, not the whole thing, but just a little bit of the mystery of the ancient past. That's kind of my goal. And it's good to collect the knowledge of people in different places, because I cannot visit everywhere all the time. And also when I was younger and I used to go around like doing the tourist thing, I didn't take so many pictures or videos because I was just going to look at it. I didn't want to spend the whole day like doing this. Now, because I want to film like footage about different places and talk about places that I've been to or that I'm going to, I feel that I have to like get the footage myself. But it's impossible. You cannot go everywhere. And sometimes I think, I went there once. I wish I'd taken some pictures. Or looked a bit closer, or taken a measuring tape and measured that, or something. Or you find something on Google Earth and you think that's so interesting, I wish I could get right up close to it. So but yeah, you can only do so much, and I think it's really good to get the information from everybody, and also people in different roles. Like you say, you're a tour guide, so you meet lots of different people coming up there, from archaeologists to tourists. So and tourists all come from different backgrounds, job-wise, and in terms of where they're from and their exposure to other archaeological sites. So you kind of get to pool all that knowledge and solve a little bit of the mystery.
And exactly, that's the good thing about yourself as well. You're very open-minded. I mean, you do get narrow-minded people anywhere you go in the world, but I think with these types of ancient structures, yes, you've got exactly what the academics saying that most likely you're right, but then you just open your eyes and you think about visually or creatively what it could have been used for. And a few years ago, I took a family from the Disney Magic on tour, one of the cruise ships, and the little girl was only 4, and to try and keep her entertained, I did the tour of Skara Brae as an area that held unicorns for their local areas. So I said, this is where ancient man kept the unicorns. So in Scotland, the unicorn is our national animal, is a unicorn. So I did my entire tour of Skara Brae based on facts for the parents, but for this wee girl, this is where Mr. Unicorn, Mrs. Unicorn lived with their children and so on, and it kept them really engaged. But it's not the same with everybody. Everybody wants specific technical information, but for her it was different.
And it is they're magical places, so that it's nice to have the magic.
Correct, exactly, definitely.
And I'm so like, just one more thing, like Skara Brae. I just think it's so incredible. What do you think was going on there?
I think it was a sort of a hub of everything, probably peace for a long time, maybe its entire time. It was lived continuously for 800 years, and it's a unfortunately for the North Atlantic, it's taken much of the village away over thousands of years. But it was an intricate network of small buildings, all interlinked up to one another, very vibrant, probably busy community, farming and fishing, slightly better climate. And you can see how a Neolithic man has gone into building these amazing structures, such as Skara Brae. The buildings that remain, yes, we're missing the roofs, but most of what you see is original. They went into so much detail in building the homes to have a hearth in the middle and their beds at either side, and perhaps a dresser. They've even got their own toilet, and their toilet links to an underground drain that was probably predates Neolithic period. It goes on a slope away to what's believed to be Soakaway, away from the freshwater lake ahead of them. So they had these builders that went into all this information, which we would think is pretty technical nowadays, over 5,000 years ago, to build somewhere that would last the ages, and it lasted more than 800 years. So yeah, they did an incredible job.
I just appreciate the fact that the areas of it that appear to be domestic dwellings look warm and cozy.
They are,
when they were roofed over, because often at these sites you think, gosh, it would have been chilly living here.
yeah, we've got a couple of interesting places up here. The Skara Brae, certainly, if you walk into one of the older buildings, where if the Historic Scotland give you the access to it, then you can feel the instant difference in shelter. Plus, sandstone does tend to keep its heat, so if you've got a fire going and you're mostly roofed over, it'd be quite warm, a bit smelly in there, but it would be definitely warm and wind protected. And there's a really amazing old structure, an old farm dwelling on an island called Papawestre here in the Orkney Islands, and it's called the Knap of Howar. Knap Howar, Howar, and it's believed to date back as far back as the Middle Stone Age. It's supposed to be, or believed to be, one of the oldest farm dwellings in northwest Europe, and it's right next to the sea nowadays. But it's an incredible building, definitely.
Wow! And how long would it take to get there from where you are now?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. You've got two ways. You can either take a ferry, so one of the Orkney Islands ferries. It takes, I think, about 2 hours to get from Kirkwall, the main town or city here, to Papawestre. Or you can do what a lot of people do, which is really fun. You can take the world's shortest scheduled commercial flight. And so you go to the island of Westray, and then between Westray and Papawestre is a distance of, I think it's not very far, a couple of miles max, to fly from one side of the island to the other, depending on the wind direction. Some people can do it in about 1 minute and 20 seconds from takeoff to landing. So normally what I would do when I'm doing a tour for Papawestre, go to Knap of Howar, I would take my clients, you go to Westray or to Papawestre by plane. So not only have you done the world's shortest scheduled commercial flight signed by your captain and your time, but you've also visited one of the best preserved and oldest farm dwellings in northwest Europe. Yeah, it's an amazing place to visit.
Oh, that sounds good. I want to do that now.
Yeah, you'd like it. It's great.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Kinlay. I know you've got to go and pick your son up from school,
yeah,
so I won't keep you for much longer.
No
but thanks very much for joining me today. Everybody, please go to Kinlay's website, check out his social media, his YouTube channel. There's some great videos on there. And if you're interested in going up to Orkney and having a tour, Kinlay's your man.
I really appreciate that, Laura. Thank you. And it's the same to my people who will be watching this on my social media channels. Do check out Megalith Hunter. And I'm looking forward to hopefully be able to speak to Laura again. And perhaps you can come up to Orkney at some stage and we can do a joint tour of the ancient sites and visit them for you. But I've been really honoured. Thank you for being invited on as episode number 1. Thank you very much.
Thank you.